So please fill that out. If you're not a member, we encourage you to join. It's a whopping $25 last time I checked. Is that right, Charlotte? Yeah, and 15 for students. It's a great organization. We've been really proud of what the organization has been doing. We'll hear more about stuff tomorrow, but we do beach cleanups, we do invasive weed pulls, we do, what else? We do this event, we do trail work, so there's all kinds of hands-on projects in the sound that we do. We also have the Prince William Sound Forum where you can learn about Prince William Sound and these great videos that Williams Cruz puts together for us, and lots more other stuff. I'd also like to thank Charlotte Hughes, right here's our executive director. Wave Charlotte to everybody, who's basically been the workhorse behind this. And Ellen's in here too. Ellen Ray's in here, I think. Maybe she's still out in the sun. She's also been helping us out this winter. So with that, I want to introduce Dan Olsen, field biologist with North Gulf Oceanic Society. Mother Knows Best, Culture Among Killer Whales. Well, it's appropriate the day after Mother's Day, so Dan.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Dan. I work for the North Gulf Oceanic Society, a small nonprofit. We're the ones who maintain the catalogs for all the killer whales here in Prince William Sound and in Kenai Fjords. We have a small little boat called the Natoa that's kept in Seward and occasionally comes over, and I'll be getting on board that on June 14th to go out for a week and a half to Hinchinbrook. But there's about 3 of us running that boat. John Durbin will be working Kenai Fjords a little bit, and I'll do a trip in the Sound. Then Craig will do a trip in the Sound. And I find them absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure many of you do too. How many people brand new to Whittier? Anybody brand new? All right. Are you brand new to Alaska as well? Whoa, you're in for a treat already. What would you call the clicking? Anybody? Echolocation, thank you very much. And thank you, Megan, for trying to give somebody else the opportunity. And these are calls that belong to the AJ pod specifically. The AJs center their range in Prince William Sound. We see them in Kenai Fjord some, but not much. But very often Hinchinbrook Entrance, Kayak Island, and Night Island Passage, Montague Strait is their general center of their range. I'd like to introduce you to an animal that's dear to me, named AT9 or Chiniga, one of the Chugach transients, or AT1s, they're also called. This is a group that swam through the oil spill in 1989 and lost 9 members as a result. I hope they don't know they don't have to respond. That happened a long time ago. AT9, I was running tour boats in Seward for a bunch of years for Kenai Fjords tours, and I saw a single animal breaching and tail slapping. I put down a hydrophone. How many people have hydrophones out on the water? Any boats? Yes, yes. I highly recommend having a hydrophone on your tour boat and potentially even on your kayak. I've lost about 3 off my kayak over time. I was running a boat tour, saw this animal slapping its tail. I dropped my hydrophone, and I heard these types of calls. Sounds lonely, doesn't it? It is actually a call that these guys use to regroup because they're mammal-eating killer whales, we call transients. They're hunting in stealth, they get separated. They use a call to regroup. That's as close as we get to vocabulary amongst the whales. We don't really see anything that looks like vocabularies, but many species obviously have regrouping calls, which you can see in just a tremendous number of species. And so this one was calling. I radioed to Eva Salidas, who was on the research boat at the time. I said, I have a recording. Would you like to hear it? There's one lone female in Thumb Cove. And she said, yeah, play it. And she immediately said, oh, that's one of the AT1s trying to get in touch with the rest of its group. And I was like, yeah, right. You know, I didn't believe it. I was like, there's no way. And sure enough, I left and ran into 2 more animals, and they were all together within a half hour. Craig and Eva photographed all of them, and it was who she thought it was. She had done her whole master's degree on that pod. And so I was hooked at that point, and I had to go back to grad school and get involved and learn all that. Here's the 7 remaining Chugach transients. However, AT3, kind of on the leftmost one, the second one down from the top on the left, is missing, currently missing. We've seen the other 2 and haven't seen that one this year or last year. A few captains are really good about getting us photographs, and we've seen those 2 up top, but not the 3rd one with it. So there might be healthy, they are quiet, but oh, there we go. But we don't like to call them transients because it's misleading. They don't just roam around willy-nilly. They do have a bigger range than the other ones, but they do have local hotspots they like to go to. They're just not quite as predictable, but they do have a center range, home range, and haunts that they go to from time to time. And of course, in the spill itself, 2 pods swam through, one group of mammal-eating killer whales, the AT1s, one group of fish-eating killer whales, the ABs, and they both crashed dramatically right after the spill, which was probably exposure to the contaminants and breathing it in pneumonia and other issues, but also there was probably a food supply issue for the AT1s. They eat a lot of harbor seal and Dall's porpoise, who were probably affected as well, and not to mention reproductive impacts, because you have those kind of contaminants really wreak havoc on reproductive systems. And the AT1s have not had a calf since since before that oil spill. The AB pod, the fish-eating pod that swam through, did have had calves. There's some killer whales going right through the oil there. And so that's Chiniga. She's a mother, and I'm going to talk a lot about, well, the title I have, Mother Knows Best. There's really strong evidence that we see culture in many different species of animals around the world: chimpanzees, bonobos, elephants, wolves, pilot whales, sperm whales, killer whales. And we see it in traditions, learning that is passed on through generation and isn't widespread knowledge throughout the whole population, but persists in family groups. I'd love to talk about why that is. And if you need a good read, it's not a soft one, but Integrate Silence. Eva Salidas wrote about dealing with her own battling cancer, which she lost in 2015. And while watching the AT1s, her study pod decline after going through the oil spill. So she has a lot to say about contaminants and going extinct. With this group, we do call it an extinction, not just a reduction in population, because they have a unique genetic haplotype. They're not as related to the rest of the transients in the area as you would think. So culture, do we have any anthropologists in the room who are like, no, culture only belongs to humans? Anybody? It is a debate in academic circles, but mostly those who have been studying cultural amongst humans for a long, long time. It's one of those things that we like to hold dear to ourselves as part of being what makes us human. But as we study more about animal intelligence, animal culture, what is truly special about being human is getting narrower and narrower as we see many things in their society. So we have specific diets by different families. Different families have certain patterns, certain locations they go to, specific diets, and these kind of things lead to speciation eventually, and we're actually seeing that before our very eyes at the moment. I have rubbing beaches up there. Sometimes killer whales will rub their bellies on the beach. And real quick, I use killer whale a lot. Is there anyone who has a problem with that? Anyone who prefers orca? Oh, you're all shy. I know that's not true. You didn't raise your hand. No, they're both appropriate terms, but in science, I am obliged on a science paper to write killer whale because it is in English actually the common name, the official scientific common name. Orcinus, orca is a Latin name, and killer whale is the official name, like tufted puffin or stellar sea lion. So you'll hear me say killer whale quite a bit. And if you say, oh, but they're not killers, they're sweet, just ask a coho salmon what they think about that. They have very specific hunting spots that are family driven, that they learn from their mother and grandmother. They have their calls, their family pod calls belong to their families. In that very first recording that you heard, the wah from the AJs belongs to that family only, and we can tell which family's which by their calls. How many people have heard of the terms resident, transients, and offshores? Get ready for a switch, because it's all changing now. We call them residents because they were so predictable, but they should be called loudmouth fish-eating whales that travel around in big groups. Whereas transients, we call them transients because we don't see them as often. They show up sporadically. We should call them stealthy mammal hunters that travel in small groups. And we have offshores, which are shark specialists, and particularly sleeper shark in our area. And it appears that over 90% of their diet is actually shark. So now there's some new Latin names proposed. There's been an official proposal to call residents and transients separate and new species. Oceanic ater and Oceanic rectipinus. You notice the word orca, it doesn't even show up there. You can deal with that however you want. I'm fine if you still keep calling them orca, but the proposed common name for the ones that eat fish is blackfish, although it hasn't been determined yet. Oceanic ater does mean dark or black, and is a common, you may not know, but the Latin name of killer whales has changed over time. There's probably 30 different proposals over the history, in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. It's not always been the same. The genus name was orca for a while. It's just all over, and ater and rectipinus do show up in that record over time. It has been proposed by naturalists 100 years ago, so that does have a foundation. So be ready for the term potentially for blackfish for the ones that eat fish, and Biggs, named after Michael Biggs, who started the whole study and was the first one to realize that some ate mammals only and some ate fish only, which is pretty interesting. And that leads us to the whole world, right? And is there a laser guy on this one? Oh, but it doesn't reflect on the screen. We have on the left panel, that's all North Pacific, or not North Pacific, Northern Hemisphere. The right panel is Southern Hemisphere. Megan, did you see type Bs this year? High five. Type A's? All down the Antarctics, it's really interesting. You see how some of them actually look different. And sometimes that's a sign that you're getting different species. But in the North Pacific, they all look the same. But you notice that some of them are smaller than the other versions. In each panel, you have male on one side and female on the other side. And I'm going to go right here real quick. The top are the fish eaters, the blackfish. Next one down is the bigs, the ones eating mammals. Next one down is the offshores that take shark. See how there's size difference in the North Atlantic? The smaller one eats mostly fish, like herring. Ours don't eat herring in Alaska, but mostly fish, like herring and salmon. And then the bigger one eats mostly mammals, but it may not be so exclusive as here. In the Antarctic, type A, big B, small b, type C and D, and their diets. Very big prey for type A, small whales, big seals. The large type E is the ones that wave wash seals off the ice, if you've seen that, which is nuts. The small type B, the Gerlache killer whale, has been observed taking penguins, but is suspected to maybe take fish as well. And the raw sea one takes fish, mainly. We don't have as much study. We don't have as much data to say it's exclusive or not. And type, oh, there we go. I don't have a problem being soft-spoken. Anyway, and type D on the bottom is the one that is kind of a mystery. There's very few sightings, very little data, and we think they eat fish because they do follow fishing boats around fishing vessels. So we're not sure. We don't know much about their diet. But what you see is, whenever there's high abundance, like in temperate or polar regions, then you get specialization. And when you get specialization, a generalist is not going to come to Prince William Sound and win out over the specialists. Because there's high abundance and the specialists get really good at what they do, and because they listen to their mother and grandmother. They pass down cultural knowledge, where to fish, how to fish, what fish to eat. Yes?
Two quick questions before you move on from the Latin names. How come they haven't, one, got a Latin name for the offshore, and which group, I assume to put it in with the transient, and why would they ever come up with the name blackfish when it's a mammal, and it's just gonna confuse people who don't know, who already sometimes think they're fish?
That's a good question. Why call it blackfish, and why, and what about the offshores? Starting with the blackfish, blackfish was a common usage term in the past, and also for natives. And so there's a nod in this science paper recently to consult with local native groups for their input on what to call them, because they're such a rich part of their culture. So they're proposing blackfish, but they're also opening up to native groups to have input on that. Orcinus orca is reserved for all the rest of the ones in the world, and the reason that offshores weren't lumped in, their closest relative is actually the fish-eating types. But we don't have enough data, enough research, enough samples of DNA and everything, and just the whole picture to warrant the case of lumping them in or lumping them out or calling them their own thing. So it's just a lack of data. Same thing with the Antarctic, but the Antarctics are probably the next. The ones that look different, the type Bs and Cs, are probably the next ones to be divided out. I hope that answers your question there. So back to cultural transmission again here. When you swim with your mother and grandmother, you learn through generations. You've seen a big, tall male dorsal fin. People say 6 feet. It's usually about 5, actually. And when people say 9 meters, it's usually about 6 or 7 for our fish eaters, actually. Books always have the longest possible, right? So most animals are not as long as what you read. But when you see that big male with a big, tall dorsal fin, it's easy to assume he might be the leader of the pack because he's big and strong. But he's a giant mama's boy. He's going to swim with his mother his entire life. But the benefit of that is to learn from her and learn from grandmother. What the males, what you might ask, how do they not inbreed then? And it's just that when we see these multiple groups coming together and the males cross over, and we'll see them intermixing with other pods, and we think they go for the calls that sound dissimilar, the sexy foreign accent. Another way we see culture is there are certain beaches that we see beach rubbing in. Megan, Emmy, anybody seen beach rubbing? In Resurrection Bay we have a lot, but also here in the Sound, Crafton, I think it's happened. There's a long beach by Crafton somewhere, or south. Noel, maybe. Then down Little Bay, I've seen it happen down Little Bay. There's a few beaches around here, Resurrection Bay, Fox Island, of course, and a few places in Nyalek Bay. And here's what it sounds like when a several-ton killer whale rubs its belly on the beach. Got to scratch that itch. We think it's exfoliation. We think it's a spa run. And if you ever have a chance to read an interesting science paper, there's one about Antarctic killer whales running all the way to Brazil and back. And not at a good time for calves, or a good pace for calves, and not a good time for feeding. We think it's a giant spa run to get rid of that dead skin on the surface. And we hate to anthropomorphize, but that calls, And we also see culture passed down through generations in where these pods are feeding and foraging. Here is a bunch of we collect diet data in 2 different ways. We collect poop, which is very exciting. It has so much information in it. And we collect salmon scales when they share fish. On this chart, purple is Chinook salmon, orange is chum salmon, and it may be hard to see the gray or silver rings. Those are coho. But it's very easy to assume one thing. What do you think is the biggest part of their diet, just by looking at this real quick? The purple, the Chinook, and it is important to their diet. However, what we've been noticing as we look a little closer, All these purple dots here, these were scales collected only during 1 month in Seward. If you've been to Seward, May 15 or June 15 is a hot time for Chinook. But outside that time, we have more chum and coho, and we don't see them in that same spot, and we don't have many samples from there. It's just we're oversampled right there. At the same time in Hinchinbrook entrance, between Hinchinbrook and Montague Islands, at the same time, they're eating chum there, and that dynamic lasts longer and has almost double the number of animals. It has an average of 34 animals showing up there every day, whereas this spot has an average of 18 animals showing up every day. So what looks on the surface like heavy Chinook consumption, they may be eating more chum than Chinook, and we're working on a diet paper right now that has a bit of that. So chum and Chinook are both very important, so is coho, but we do see halibut in each pod and during each month, just not in as high percentages, and we see arrowtooth flounder by one pod in particular, the AE pod, which is one of the common pods to see right here on Passage Canal and the whole Western Sound. Well, inside the Sound, they're kind of the home bodies of the Sound. They don't get out much. We saw them going towards the ocean one time, and they turned around, and we were joking about, no, Mom said don't go out to the ocean. But they have shown up in Seward a couple times, but they probably have the smallest range of any pod of killer whales I've ever heard of, and they are eating, maybe they're eating arrowtooth, so they don't have to travel so far, but it's probably not as fatty or nutritious, certainly not as tasty. But we do find also in the fecal samples, the poop samples, that chum is super important in Hinchinbrook, Chinook super important near Seward just during that 1 month, coho during a good part of the summer, and chum also with a little bit of halibut, a little bit of black cod, a little bit of sockeye. Herring is virtually non-existent in our diet data, and pink salmon is virtually non-existent in our diet data. Here's how we collect salmon scales. When you see a killer whale turning and diving at the same time, anyone ever seen that? Just a rapid turn and dive. Chances are very good they're on a fish and they're chasing it. And if you hear if you could hear the echolocation at the same time, it'd be like tick, 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 tick. As the closer they get, it becomes a buzz as they get closer and closer. And while they're feeding, so after a mom will share with her calf, then we collect the scales. Poop is a little different. We just follow behind them until we see something that looks like yogurt, I guess, or anyway. Don't need to talk about food at this moment, but they were, we scoop it up, we freeze it, we send it to the NOAA lab down in Seattle. And this one day in particular was very interesting. We got collected from a mom and calf. The percentage of chum was really similar, the percentage of halibut was really similar, and the percentage of Chinook, implying that they're sharing between mother and calf, and grandmother and grandcalf have been documented and proven and shown through video. And males apparently don't share very much. But they do get out of the way. The males tend to forage in deeper water and perhaps a little more chum, and they're offshore a bit more. When you see a male that's kind of way offshore, the rest of the group's in close. Chances are the mom's diving not as deep and staying with the calf, feeding on some Chinook there, or possibly chum or coho, and then male's a little further off. Overall, we don't know because we don't have any wintertime data. And we have big gaps in our summertime data as well, but so far, based on what we know, guessing something like that. And I can't go further without giving you a little information about this one individual named Lou. You see on the far right on top, there's a mom with a big notch out of her dorsal fin. This pod spends time in both Kenai Fjords and Prince William Sound, and it may go as far as Kodiak, but that's about the extent of the range. She actually grew up in the family of the panel on the left. That's the grandmother there is her sister Cheval. But a lot of things happened for Lou, or AK-17, right about the same time. In 2010, her mom died. So she swam with her brother a lot, about a quarter mile, half mile from her sister. Didn't seem that close with her sister and those offspring. Then Lou got pregnant and her brother died, and so she bounced and started swimming with her aunt. She's swimming with her aunt, but unfortunately by the time Lou had her calf, her aunt died that year. So she didn't have the support of her mother or her aunt or her grandmother, obviously now. And she's been swimming with her cousin ever since, and the result of that was that she lost her first 2 calves. And there's actually a whole science paper out about looking at survival rates in British Columbia for the northern residents, and they were showing that survival rates for calves is actually higher if your grandmother's still alive to help out. And that's probably both in terms of knowledge, cultural knowledge, and actual grabbing fish and sharing with the calves as well. It's highly fascinating, super interesting. And now she has a calf that has made it into its 3rd year now, and all of us have our fingers crossed that we see that little one. It's pretty obvious, has a teeny little nick in the very top of the fin. So I'm eagerly awaiting some tour boat captain to send me a photograph of that one soon. You heard a little echolocation at the beginning. And this is the AB pod. This is the pod that swam through the oil spill, one of them, and near Kane's Head in Seward. And that clicking sends a signal out, bounces back. They know where fish is, but they also will know, they can navigate that way. Dolphins can find fish buried under the sand. Dolphins can tell the difference between an 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch ball bearing from the other end of a pool, these kind of things. And I'm going to talk a bit more about echolocation tomorrow, talking about more of the toothed whales. This is slower echolocation, so probably more navigation or seeing where your siblings are or looking for schools of fish in the distance probably. And the AJ call there again. And here's what the calls look like. We put down hydrophones. We have one in Hinchbrook entrance right now, one in Night Island Passage, and one in Pony Cove in Seward, and one in Marmot Island near Kodiak, and one in Kachemak Bay. And Hannah Myers has just finished her PhD and analyzing how often different pods are in different locations. And we can identify them by their calls. There's some AJ calls. There's an AB call. You can identify which pod it is by the call, very different from birds where you're identifying the species, of course. This is really cool. So, you know how killer whales just have one blowhole, right? As all the toothed whales do, but inside there's 2 nasal passages. So I want you to imagine, just take your nose and slide it up to the top of your head. Imagine that in one nostril you can make a whistle with your nostril, while the other side does a right? Everyone do it on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. It's precisely what these guys do. There's a kind of call called a biphonic call. Listen for the high pitch and the low pitch. Right? That's one animal. And what that call does, the high frequency only goes forward. The low frequency goes all around. So if mom's facing away, the calf would only hear the low frequency, not the high frequency. If mom is far away, then the high frequency has a short wavelength, interacts with plankton, and doesn't travel as far. It loses energy faster, it attenuates faster. So the relative strength between the 2 portions would be different. So with those calls, you know where mom is, how far away she is, if she's angled away or angled towards you. With the Doppler effect, you'd know if she's accelerating away or all these things. And of course, you and I can tell the difference in sound by in air, but we can't underwater. They of course, because they're hearing through their jaw, it goes so rapidly to their inner ear that they can tell direction underwater, whereas we can't. And lastly, I just have to impart these calls get passed down, and so the moms will make the calls and the calves will mimic them, and occasionally we get lucky enough to get a recording where the calf is mimicking mom. Buckle your seatbelts, you're going to die of cuteness. Come on. It's too good. It doesn't get better than that. There's one instance I had where I spent about 3 hours with the AD8 pod. A stands for Alaska, D is just a letter in the alphabet, and 8 was the matriarch, so the pod's named after that grandmother, AD8, Alpha Delta 8. And she wasn't there. We couldn't find the mom anywhere. And one of the calves was completely freaking out. We never hear calling rates we never hear calls this frequently unless it's a group of 60 animals and they're all kind of calling. We don't hear this kind of calling rate from one pod. And the tonal quality to me sounds like it's the same animal calling again and again and again. And you hate to anthropomorphize in science, but it's bad to anthropomorphize if you're making conclusions, but not necessarily to ask questions. It's really hard to imagine it's just not screaming out, "Mom, Mom." These are their last name. These are like family identifiers these calls are. All those calls belong to that family and that family only. And so that animal's trying to call out and trying to get a response. So I hope I've made a little bit of a case for culture within these animals. And I just have to end on this. Don't worry so much about the size, because brains do scale up with size regardless of intelligence. But look at the complexity. What that means is that you have more gray matter, more opportunities for connections and synapses. So it's quite likely that most of the tooth whales have more computing power than we do, actually. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. But there's a good chance when we're looking at all these toothed whales, be it a sperm whale, which you saw when? 2 days ago. Whether it's a sperm whale or Dall's porpoise or harbor porpoise or killer whales or beaked whales, we're dealing with some incredibly high intelligence. And I highly recommend this book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are, by Franz de Waal. And if you get any photographs that you think could identify individuals, or if you have a hydrophone and make a video that has the sound in it, please send it along to walesalaska@gmail. You see a trend there, walesalaska.org, walesalaska@gmail, @walesalaska. Shouldn't be too hard to find us. So I will hand over the mic to Lee, who has a little activity. Okay. Okay, sounds good.
Questions?
So, Dan, thank you, as always. So amazing. Why do they keep changing the names? What's the purpose of that? Why would they keep changing the scientific name?
Well, the question is why they keep changing the names. I don't know that, over time, historically, yeah. Basically, there's no one massive authority worldwide. You can assign a Latin name however you want. It's just that the world has generally agreed more recently. But imagine Europe 100 years ago, somebody finds a fossil and says, oh, I bet this is, some of the early ones were Delphinus for killer whale. We're calling it Delphinus for a bit. And then so you basically have a bunch of naturalists competing for, oh, I don't agree. I don't think that's a Delphinus. I think it should be something else. I'll call it Orca something or Sinus something. So it's mainly disagreement between naturalists. In the past, now currently this proposed change is really about deciding that there's enough genetic, social, behavioral, diet, morphological differences in these groups to actually call them different species now, and therefore assign a new Latin name.
Will they kind of expect that to catch on?
Yes, but of course, for the fish-eating and mammal-eating types here, Craig started this project in the 80s, 84, and that's 40 years of study here. In British Columbia, 40 years of study. In the San Juan Islands, 45 years of study. So there's a huge amount of data to say, yes, we know these differences are intact. We have all this data. And around the world, we're building that data, but we don't have enough yet. So we do expect it to roll down, particularly with Antarctic types, but you need a lot of data to know, to make a proposal like that. You can't just say, oh, I think they're different. Although there is one, in California, there's one guy trying to, we got new species, and he's just muddying up the conversation. It's a bit of clickbait, actually, but yeah. Other?
So if any one of us are working or recreating in the Sound and we get a picture of an orca that might have enough detail to be identifying, do you want us to send that to you?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Particularly transients, because they're hard for us to see year in and year out. If you do see the fish-eating ones, the larger groups, then it's the mother-calf pairs that we have a hard time with. We don't want to encourage anyone to maneuver closer to get photographs for us, because you need a permit to do that. But if you happen to be in a good spot and you do a swim by, I will say this, video from my phone is not very useful to us. I often don't even look at it. Big lens photos are the best, but occasionally some of these big notches we might identify from a long ways away without. But typically we're looking for people with 200, 300, 400 millimeter lens. So if your guests have those big lenses, say, hey, can I grab your email and send your email address to Dan? And then I can follow up on that kind of thing. Yeah.
Thanks.
One more question?
Yeah.
So killer whales have been in the news lately, especially related to, I don't know, being trawled up or dying. Can we comment on any of those hazards in Prince William Sound related to the whales that we're going to see?
Yeah, the question is issues, interactions with fisheries. There were trawlers that were catching quite a few killer whales out in the trawl nets, out in the Aleutians, which is pretty tragic. The same thing happens with porpoise a lot and doesn't get talked about as much because people don't love them quite as much, but is equally as much of an issue there. The vaquita in Gulf of California is highly, highly endangered. We may have lost it already due to fishing net interactions. Here in Prince William Sound, years ago, there were fishermen that would shoot killer whales in perceived competition, and thankfully the Endangered Species Act has taken a big bite out of that. There's been different deterrents, especially with killer whales and sperm whales trying to depredate on long lines, so some people throw explosives in the water. There are definitely issues. Even the Navy doing their operations, they're practicing their readiness and detonations out in the Gulf of Alaska. We wish they were doing that further offshore. Of course, that would be more costly for them and everything, and there's pushback on that. But there are issues, not quite as much as what the tragedy we're seeing in the trawl nets out in the Aleutians, but it's a constant education battle for sure. And lots and lots of fishermen really want to do the right thing, and they're very interested in these conversations. So go out there and have those conversations, send them to us, and it's a good thing to keep working on.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Should I do it? Or?